Ever cut someone off and never looked back? Right, I did, if so.
Everyone was clapping like they'd just watched a Hallmark movie proposal, complete with string lights, fancy hors d'oeuvres, and a backyard that cost more than my first car to decorate. Liam had just given a toast that made my stomach flip in the good way, and when I looked at him across that tiny sea of paper lanterns and smiling faces, I could already picture the life we were about to build. I wasn't the girl who dreamed about weddings growing up, but in that moment, I got it. It wasn't about the dress or the ring. It was about that look in his eyes, the one that said, "You're my forever." For one full minute, I actually believed this night would belong to us. And then she stood up. Jessica. My younger sister by 2 years, and by every definition, a walking headline. The kind of woman who doesn't enter a room, she takes it hostage. Even her pregnancy glow had an edge, like she could market it as a lifestyle brand. She wasn't supposed to say anything. We'd made it clear this was our engagement party, not an open mic night. But Jessica never really asked for permission. She waited until the champagne had been poured, until all eyes were already on her because of that bodycon dress that practically screamed fertility goddess, and then, God help me, she placed a hand on her stomach and cleared her throat. I wasn't sure when to say this, she began, with that faux humble lilt that only ever meant trouble. But I guess now's as good a time as any. And right there, surrounded by our closest friends and family, she smiled with her whole face and said, "I'm pregnant." A beat of silence. Not because people were shocked, everyone was always expecting Jessica to do something like this, but because it was so spectacularly timed that it short-circuited everyone's ability to process how unbelievably rude it was. And then came the applause. My aunt gasped like someone had just handed her a grandchild. My dad wiped at his eyes. Even my mom, who had just an hour ago told me how proud she was of me, jumped to her feet to hug her. I looked at Liam, and to his credit, he wasn't clapping. His eyes were locked on mine, and I saw it, the moment his jaw tightened, the second his smile died. He didn't need to say anything. I already knew what he was thinking, because it was the same thing I was thinking. Not again. Jessica turned to me as if the cameras had cut back to the real star of the show. "Sorry," she said, cocking her head just slightly, that smirk growing like a fungus. "Guess I stole the spotlight again." And that was it. No apology. No attempt to pivot back to me or Liam. Just the same old script she'd been reading from since we were kids. When I got the lead role in the school play, she sprained her ankle right before curtain call. When I landed my first real job out of college, she got a dramatic haircut and cried about how no one supported her dreams. On my 30th birthday, she announced her engagement. That marriage lasted 9 months. But this time, it was different. This time, it was the one thing I had kept sacred. Liam and I had talked about how this day mattered. We weren't rich, and we weren't flashy. We'd put everything into making this one night special, not extravagant, just meaningful. It was ours. And she took it like it was a toy I hadn't finished playing with. The rest of the night passed in a blur of polite smiles and hollow congratulations. I remember refilling the same glass of champagne 3 times without ever taking a sip. Liam stayed close, too close. He was afraid I'd either bolt or explode. But I did neither. I just watched her. How she glowed under the string lights. How she held court with that belly barely showing. How she hugged our mom and whispered something that made her laugh like a schoolgirl. I didn't cry. Not until the last guest left and I sat in the living room with my shoes off, feet aching, makeup smudged, and dress wrinkled like the whole evening had been pressed through a juicer. Liam brought me a cold bottle of water, not saying a word, and I finally exhaled the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding since her announcement. "I'm sorry," he said. Simple. Sincere. No dramatics. That's who he was. "She did it on purpose," I whispered. "Of course she did," he said. "She's done it your whole life." And there it was. The quiet confirmation that I wasn't crazy or bitter or insecure. That this wasn't just a misunderstanding or bad timing. That Jessica had intentionally hijacked the one moment I'd finally carved out for myself. And the worst part? Everyone let her. Liam sat next to me, close enough for his shoulder to touch mine, and leaned in. "We don't have to take it," he said. Not this time. I turned to him confused. What do you mean? He smiled, not smug, not angry, but calm in that terrifying way people smile when they've already made up their mind. He reached for his phone, tapped a few times, and handed it to me. It was a draft. A save-the-date announcement, like the one we'd planned to send next week. Except this one wasn't the same. And as I read it, line by line, something in me clicked. Maybe it was pettiness. Maybe it was rage. Maybe it was just finally standing up. But whatever it was, I didn't stop him. I pressed send. The next morning, the house still smelled faintly of Prosecco and those overpriced soy candles my mother insisted made everything feel classy, though to me it just smelled like someone had tried too hard to cover up something sour. I was sitting at the kitchen counter, picking at a piece of toast that had gone cold hours ago, when my mom walked in wearing the same silk robe she always wore when pretending nothing was wrong. She smiled, not even sheepishly, and said, "Wasn't last night just wonderful?" I stared at her, not sure whether to laugh or scream. There was a bite behind her cheerfulness, like she already knew how I felt, but was going to pretend she didn't, just to make me the problem for reacting. I asked her, as calmly as I could manage, whether she thought it was appropriate that Jessica chose that exact moment to announce her pregnancy. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, then softened with the kind of performative patience she always reserved for me and only me. She didn't mean anything by it, she said, already pouring coffee, already closing the door to the conversation. You know how she is. Timing was probably just coincidence. The word hung in the air like bad perfume. Coincidence. As if Jessica didn't rehearse that moment in the mirror 10 times before walking into the backyard. As if she hadn't done this exact thing, overshadowing, hijacking, recentering the narrative at every major milestone of my life. But the worst part wasn't Jessica. It was the reflexive way my family closed ranks around her, like a muscle memory too practiced to be accidental. I asked Mom if she'd be just as understanding if I'd done something similar at Jessica's baby shower. She didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. The pause was loud enough. Then came the sigh, the heavy-lidded pity look, and finally the quiet condemnation dressed up as gentle guidance. You really should try to be happy for her. She's going to be a mother. This is a special time. There it was, the unspoken rule carved into every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every photo where Jessica stood in the middle and I faded into the background. Her milestones were sacred. Mine were optional. I was the supporting character in the Jessica show, expected to clap, smile, and never take up too much space. Later that day, we all met for brunch. The kind of bland, sun-drenched family meal where everyone pretends nothing happened, where we drink orange juice out of wine glasses to simulate joy. Jessica arrived 20 minutes late, floating in like royalty, draped in one of those flowing, pastel maternity dresses that somehow managed to look effortless and expensive at the same time. She carried a folder filled with black and white ultrasound photos, like she was handing out Oscar invitations. "Oh my God, look at this one," she cooed, holding up an image that could have been a jelly bean or a kidney stone for all I knew. Everyone leaned in. Everyone made the same noises, adoring, impressed, reverent. She turned to Liam and me only once, flashing that polished smile like we were minor guests at our own event. I waited for someone, anyone, to bring up the engagement. No one did. My dad asked Liam about work. My uncle ranted about airline baggage fees. My cousin showed Jessica how to crop the ultrasound photo for Instagram. Meanwhile, the ring on my finger felt like a joke I wasn't in on. After brunch, as Liam and I walked to the car in silence, he stopped, checked his phone, and said, "Your sister already posted it." I didn't even need to ask what it was. There on her feed, for her 10,000 followers to see, was the sonogram photo with the caption, "Surprises are the best kind of joy. Baby coming soon." Guess I just couldn't wait. She hadn't mentioned our engagement once. That night, I sat in bed with my laptop open and stared at our original save-the-date draft. It was simple, heartfelt, the kind of thing we thought people would read and smile at. But now it felt flat. Powerless. It felt like a concession in a game I didn't know I was playing until Jessica reminded me that I was always losing. Liam, ever the quiet strategist, came in, sat beside me, and showed me a new draft. It had the same layout, the same fonts, the same photograph of us laughing by the lake, except now, the date was different. It was sooner. It was right over Jessica's scheduled baby shower weekend. I blinked at him. "You're serious?" "She made a choice," he said. "We're making one too." It wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about boundaries. It was about sending a signal, to her, to my parents, to myself, that I wasn't going to keep swallowing my voice just to keep the peace in a family that never extended me the same courtesy. For once, I didn't want to be polite. I wanted to be undeniable. We didn't make a scene. We didn't post anything online. We simply mailed out the new save the dates to the people who mattered most. No cryptic captions. No dramatic hashtags. Just a message, wrapped in pastel cardstock, delivered with the quiet force of a line finally drawn. The next morning, while sipping coffee and watching the rain tap against the kitchen window, my phone rang. It was Jessica. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't need to hear her voice to know what it would sound like. I could already imagine it, sharp, confused, a little breathless, as if she were genuinely shocked that I, the background character, had dared to step into her spotlight and flip the switch. Whatever she had to say could wait. Because for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't interested in giving her the stage. By the time the new save the dates had been sent, I no longer felt nervous or vindictive. I felt oddly calm, the kind of calm that comes not from winning, but from deciding you're done losing. We hadn't told anyone about the change except the handful of close friends we actually wanted at the wedding. The invitations were simple, printed on the same cream cardstock as the originals, but with one notable difference. The date now landed squarely on the weekend Jessica had chosen for her baby shower. A weekend our mother had practically etched into the family calendar with glitter and glue. We didn't add any explanation. We didn't need to. The message was folded into the silence, and it was louder than any confrontation I could have staged. For years, I'd been told to be the bigger person, to take the high road, to let things go for the sake of peace. But peace, as it turns out, feels a lot more like quiet resentment when it only goes one way. 2 days later, I was sitting at my desk, half listening to a meeting I had no interest in, when my phone lit up with a text from my cousin Rachel. "Is the date a mistake? Thought your wedding was in July." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took a sip of lukewarm coffee and reread her message, knowing that behind those 12 words lay the question she really wanted to ask: "Are you seriously doing this to your sister?" That afternoon, the texts multiplied. One from an old college friend asking if the venue had changed. Another from Liam's aunt, politely requesting confirmation of the new schedule. But the one that twisted something inside me came from my mother. "Call me." No punctuation. No warmth. Just 2 words that, coming from her, felt more like an order than a request. I waited until evening, then called, because avoiding her would only delay the inevitable. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with forced composure. "Is this really happening?" I knew better than to pretend confusion. "Yes. The venue's available that weekend, and it works better for us." "You do realize Jessica's shower is the same weekend?" I paused. "Yes." Silence. Not the stunned kind, but the kind that simmers with quiet disapproval. "You couldn't have picked another date?" I leaned back in my chair, pressing the cold rim of my glass against my lips. "You mean like Jessica could have picked another time to announce her pregnancy?" "That's not the same thing." "No, it never is. Not when it's her." She exhaled slowly, as if exhausted by a child who simply won't behave. "You're making this difficult." And she made my engagement meaningless. "She's pregnant." It was a special moment. It was our moment. And she stole it with a smile. There was another pause, and then her voice softened, not with empathy, but strategy. "This is going to divide the family." "I didn't divide anything," I said, flat and firm. "I'm just refusing to play along anymore." She said nothing after that. I hung up first. Later that night, Liam and I sat on the couch watching mindless television, neither of us really paying attention. He reached over, took my hand, and asked if I was okay. I told him I wasn't sure. I wasn't sad, exactly. I wasn't angry anymore either. What I felt was something heavier and older than both, like digging through a box of memories only to realize they'd all been arranged around someone else's story, and you were just the background noise. The next morning, Jessica finally responded. Not with a call. Not with a calm conversation. She went nuclear the way she always did through social media. Her post was a smiling photo of her holding her bump, a faint glow applied through filters and presets, captioned with saccharine poison. Some people can't celebrate others unless they're the center of attention. Grateful I'm surrounded by love, real love. The comments flooded in friends, acquaintances, strangers, all offering support and praise. Words like strong, glowing, queen energy. I read them without reacting, though a few burned more than I expected. One, from a mutual friend, said, "Ignore the haters. Some sisters are just jealous." Jealous. That word always finds its way into the narrative when a woman stops shrinking herself. When she speaks up, draws a line, demands room. It's easier to call her bitter than to admit she might be right. Liam didn't say much, just closed the app and tossed his phone aside. "Let her spin it," he said. "She needs the audience. We don't." But part of me still bristled. Not because I needed people to agree with me, but because for once I wanted the truth to matter more than the performance. By the end of the week, word had spread. Friends began choosing sides without saying it outright, some declining their RSVPs with vague excuses, others sending quiet texts of solidarity. Jessica hadn't reached out directly. She didn't need to. Her silence was a performance in itself, the absence of acknowledgement meant to signal both superiority and injury. Still, something in her silence felt different this time, calculated, yes, but also unsure. For once, I'd done something she didn't see coming. For once, she had to react, not orchestrate. And in that brief imbalance, I saw something she'd never shown me before, fear. Not fear of me, exactly, but fear of a world where she didn't get to control the story. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't about a party, or a date, or even revenge. It was about reclaiming the right to exist without being overshadowed. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking permission. It started with a single Instagram story, 24 seconds of filtered light and polished fury. Jessica, reclined on her velvet chaise like a sun-kissed oracle of victimhood, spoke directly into her phone with a tone so soft it almost masked the venom threaded between each carefully chosen word. She didn't say my name, of course she didn't. She never needed to. That was her gift, her particular brand of warfare. Sometimes, she said, with a sigh that dripped with practiced sorrow, the people who are supposed to love you the most hurt you in ways you'd never expect. But I guess not everyone's cut out to be happy for others. It would have been laughable if it hadn't worked so well. Within an hour, the replies began piling up, friends, followers, distant acquaintances all rushing to offer sympathy and support. Messages filled with phrases like, "Stay strong, you're glowing," and "Don't let the jealousy win." And just like that, she had reframed the narrative, transforming herself into the misunderstood sister, the poor pregnant woman under attack by a bitter, attention-starved bride. I didn't respond. Not publicly, not privately, not at all. Because I knew that responding, especially now, especially in the digital coliseum she dragged this into, would only feed her. Silence, this time, wasn't surrender. It was strategy. But my silence didn't stop the fallout from bleeding into every corner of our lives. Within 48 hours, my phone became a landmine. Some messages came cloaked in concern, the kind of phone neutral, just checking in texts designed to probe for drama without admitting they were looking for it. Others were less subtle, accusing me of being cold, selfish, ungrateful. My mother called twice, then sent a long message that read like a script from a hostage negotiation, begging me to make peace before things got even more toxic. And through it all, Liam remained steady. He watched the chaos unfold not with panic or guilt, but with a clarity that both comforted and unsettled me. One night, as we sat on the couch in a living room that felt more like a bunker than a home, he said, "She's unraveling because she doesn't know how to exist without applause." I wanted to argue, not because I disagreed, but because I knew that part of me still wanted to believe she had some capacity for self-reflection, for remorse. I spent that week drafting a message I never sent. A long, honest, brutal account of everything I had swallowed over the years, every overshadowed achievement, every manipulated memory, every moment I had bitten my tongue so she could shine. I wrote and rewrote it, not because I thought it would fix anything, but because I needed to see those words on a screen, proof that I wasn't imagining it all. But in the end, I didn't send it. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood, finally, that Jessica wasn't capable of hearing anything that didn't paint her as the hero or the victim. She lived in a world of binary roles, and in her story, I was either the adoring sister or the villain. I refused to be either. Instead, I focused on something else, something far more satisfying. I began writing my wedding speech. It wasn't a list of grievances. It wasn't a thinly veiled attack. It was a love letter to Liam, to the life we were building, to the version of myself I was finally beginning to trust. I wrote about loyalty, about choosing someone who sees you not as competition but as a partner. I wrote about what it means to share space without shrinking. And between the lines, I buried the truth not hidden, but coded, the way survivors often speak when they've learned that shouting doesn't make you heard, it only makes you a target. As the wedding approached, the tension tightened like a wire pulled too far. My father, who had until then remained quiet, invited us over for dinner under the guise of clearing the air. What followed was less a conversation and more a carefully choreographed guilt trip. He asked if we'd reconsider the date, just to avoid unnecessary drama. When I didn't respond, he tried a different angle, suggesting that it would be a powerful gesture of maturity, of grace. "Be the bigger person," he said, as if it were a crown I should wear proudly. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I already am." He didn't speak after that. Not about the wedding, not about the baby, not about anything that mattered. He served dessert in silence, and when we left, he didn't hug me goodbye. Back in the car, I stared out the window as Liam drove, the quiet hum of the engine the only sound between us. But I wasn't anxious anymore. I wasn't scared. I wasn't even angry. What I felt was something cleaner, something sharp and cold and resolute. I had spent decades trying to win a game where the rules were never in my favor. Now I had stepped off the board. I knew what would come next. Jessica wouldn't let it go. She'd find another way to spin it, to frame herself as the center. And the truth was, I no longer cared. Because I had something better than vindication. I had clarity. I had Liam. And I had a microphone waiting for me at the altar, where, for the first time, my story would be told without interruption. The sky on the morning of our wedding held the kind of stillness that almost dared you to ruin it, cloudless and pale, like a clean sheet waiting for ink. There were no limos, no flower-stuffed archways, no dramatic string quartets playing pop songs disguised as classics. We had chosen a small garden just outside the city, one that didn't come with a grand staircase or a champagne wall, but had ivy-covered trellises and soft earth underfoot, and just enough quiet to let every word matter. There were fewer than 40 guests, people who had stood beside us through the fallout, the tension, the silence, and who understood, without explanation, that this wasn't just a celebration of love but an assertion of presence, a declaration that we were no longer letting anyone else shape our narrative. Jessica didn't come. Her RSVP never arrived, though we both knew she had received the invitation. She had posted a photo that morning, herself in a silk robe, hand on belly, captioned "resting and nesting," as if the very idea of attending her sister's wedding had never even occurred to her. It wasn't surprising. What caught me off guard was the absence of my parents. They had called 3 days earlier, speaking in the same tight, diplomatic voices they always used when trying to disguise control as concern, and said they didn't feel comfortable being in the middle of a conflict. As if neutrality had ever been their stance. So they didn't come either. And, strangely, I didn't feel the loss. I had already grieved the idea of a family that would show up for me without conditions, without negotiations or comparisons or excuses wrapped in soft voices. What stood in their place were friends, mentors, colleagues, people who knew my full name, not just as an accessory to Jessica's triumphs, but as its own story, its own headline. Liam stood at the end of the aisle, not with the stiff smile of a man tolerating tradition, but with the calm certainty of someone who had chosen not just to love me but to believe in me, without fanfare or footnotes. As I walked toward him, dress swaying softly in the breeze, I didn't imagine how the photos would look or whether anyone would find the ceremony impressive enough to post about. I thought only of the weight we had carried to get here, the fights we hadn't picked, the truths we had swallowed, and how none of that had broken us. The ceremony itself was brief, deliberately so. We skipped the formal readings, the open mic moments, and the long-winded speeches from people who hadn't spoken to us in months. Instead, when the time came, I stepped forward, holding the small page I'd folded and unfolded until its creases had begun to soften. I began with gratitude, not to those who had abandoned us, but to those who had stayed, who had seen us clearly and chosen us anyway. I spoke about Liam, about the quiet way he steadied me without ever trying to fix me, about how love, at its best, isn't a spotlight but a shelter. I talked about building something small and unshakable, something that didn't require permission or applause. And then I paused. For a moment, I considered skipping the last part. I knew the risks. I knew what it would sound like, how it might be interpreted. But then I thought of all the times I had silenced myself to make others more comfortable, and I knew this was the one moment I wouldn't let pass. I've spent most of my life being asked to shrink, I said, my voice steady, not angry. To make room for others. To celebrate people who never paused to wonder whether I had something to celebrate too. Today, I am not shrinking. I am not stepping aside. Today, I take up space, not because it's convenient or allowed, but because I finally understand that I was always meant to. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full. I folded the paper and placed it back in my pocket. Liam reached for my hand, his grip warm and sure, and just like that, we stepped into the rest of our lives, not perfect, not untangled, but ours. After the ceremony, we didn't throw rice or release doves. We sat beneath the trees, passing around plates of food, laughing in that low, exhausted way that only comes after something honest. There were no choreographed dances, no cake smashing, no staged moments designed for social media. And yet, it was the most seen I had ever felt. Later, when the sun had dipped low enough to cast gold on everyone's shoulders, Liam handed me a small envelope. I thought it was a card from one of our guests, maybe a note from a relative who hadn't been able to attend. But when I opened it, I recognized it immediately. It was our save the date, the one we had sent out after Jessica's announcement, the one that had started the quiet war. Except this copy had been altered. Jessica's name had been written on the back in small, sharp letters, then crossed out with a single stroke of ink. Beneath it, Liam had written just one sentence. This time, the spotlight belongs to the woman who earned it. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't move me, but because it didn't hurt anymore. The wound had closed. The scar would stay, yes, but not as a reminder of pain. As a reminder of what it cost to finally tell the truth. Weeks later, I saw Jessica's latest post. She had given birth to a healthy baby girl. In the photo, she was holding the child against her chest, eyes downcast, smile absent. The caption read, "Some things just aren't worth fighting for." I stared at the screen, reading that line again and again, unsure whether it was meant as a dismissal or a confession. And then I set the phone down and walked outside, into a world that felt, for the first time, entirely mine. I didn't know if we'd ever speak again. I didn't know if she'd ever understand what she took from me or what I reclaimed. But maybe that wasn't the point anymore. Maybe the real ending wasn't in her apology, or her absence, or even my revenge. Maybe the real ending was that I had stopped waiting for any of it and started living like the story was already mine.